The night road to Hildburghausen, the road cut through the Thuringian forest like a scar of pale dust. It was nearly midnight, and the autumn wind came low across the pines, pushing long ribbons of fog over the rutted track. Every few seconds, the faint thrum of an engine echoed against the trees, and aging Mercedes headlamps dimmed, moving swiftly, but without urgency. It was October 22nd, 1931, and inside the car sat the man most Germans still dismissed as a fringe agitator, a political firebrand destined to burn out. But his expression tonight was calm, almost resigned. Adolf Hitler stared ahead through the windscreen, watching the silver grey fog draw close and then peel away again. His SS bodyguards sat stiffly in the back seat, their black uniforms blending with the shadows. They knew this drive well. Night travel was safer for a man who now attracted both followers and enemies in spiraling numbers. The car reached a crest overlooking the valley town of Hildburghausen. Below, the orange glow of torchlight flickered in the marketplace. Several thousand men were waiting, discontented farmers, unemployed machinists, veterans, who still walked with shrapnel deep in their limbs. They chanted not in frenzy, but in a quiet rhythmic murmur, as though warming their voices for something larger. Hitler stepped out of the car. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke from pine torches. A cold mist clung to his coat. Around him, the SS formed a protective arc, hands resting lightly on holstered pistols. He listened for a moment as the crowd shifted, restless and expectant. Above them, a banner sagged between two wooden poles. Deutschland erwacht, Germany awaken. The murmurs faded. All eyes turned to the wooden platform hastily built at the center of the square. Hitler climbed the steps slowly, each footfall hollow on the planks, echoing through the lantern. Lit dark. For a moment he stood with his head bowed, the torches behind him casting long wavering shadows across his face. Then came the silence, thick, waiting, electric. When he finally spoke, his voice carried with a practiced solemnity. Germany stands at the edge of a great turning, and the crowd leaned forward as though pulled by a wire. This was not yet the dictator the world would come to know. This was the tactician of words, the man who understood that revolution was not sparked by noise alone, but by feeding anger with purpose, humiliation with identity, despair with direction. The speech lasted just under an hour. He spoke of betrayal, of Versailles, of the broken economy of a people forgotten by the old parties. The torches sputtered in the cold air. Coal smoke drifted down from chimneys. A few snowflakes began to fall. By the time he stepped down, the crowd erupted in a roar that rolled up the valley like thunder. As he returned to his car, Hitler paused. Another snowflake landed on his glove. He looked up toward the black, indifferent sky. In that moment, silent, cold, and fragile, only one question seemed to hang in the air. Could this man still be stopped? Could the fire he was building still be tamed? The car door slammed. The engine stirred to life. The valley slipped behind him, fading into the darkness as Germany moved step by step toward a storm it did not yet understand. Germany on the brink, Germany in the autumn of 1931, stood at a precipice. The Great Depression had ravaged the nation. Industrial output had fallen by nearly half, and unemployment hovered near 5 million. Entire factory districts were silent, their smokestacks cold. Berlin's once vibrant streets filled with men selling the last valuables from their homes, coats, wedding rings, tools, anything that could buy a week's bread. Politically, the Weimar Republic was cracking under its own weight. President Paul von Hindenburg, a war hero now at the sunset of his life, ruled through presidential decrees bypassing the Reichstag that could no longer agree on anything. The old party's social democrats, centrists, liberals fought bitterly, splintering into factions unable to form stable coalitions. Meanwhile, paramilitary formations roamed the streets, communist Red Front fighters marching in serried ranks, National Socialist SA men responding with their own columns of brown uniforms, clubs, and boots. The German people were not merely divided, they were exhausted. Into this vacuum stepped Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist German Workers' Party. In the September 1930 elections, the Nazis had surged to 107 seats, becoming the second largest party in Germany. But their rise was uneven. Pockets of strong support in rural North Germany, Bavaria and Thuringia, but skepticism in the industrial West and cosmopolitan Berlin. October through December 1931 would mark a transformation. It was during these months that Hitler's influence expanded beyond party lines, shaped not by electoral victories, but by alliances, publicity coups, and strategic opportunism. Two key events defined this period. First, the Habsburg Front, a political coalition formed on October 11th between the Nazis, German nationalists, monarchist veterans, and select industrial elites. It was a shaky, distrustful alliance, but it showed Germany's conservative establishment was willing to treat Hitler as a serious political actor. Second, the referendum to dissolve the Prussian Landtag, where Hitler aligned temporarily with the communists, an unthinkable collaboration seeking to weaken Germany's largest state government. Though the referendum failed, it put Hitler at the center of national news, proving he would join with any force if it served his long-term aims. Beyond political maneuvering, Hitler intensified his campaign of public appearances. Between October and December, he spoke in Munich, Hamburg, Dusseldorf, Hanover, Berlin, and dozens of small towns. These events were not merely speeches, they were rituals of grievance and unity. The SA marched with drums and banners. Local supporters provided torches and food. The emotionally charged atmosphere turned each gathering into a demonstration of momentum and inevitability. But beneath this rise lay a quieter question debated within Germany's conservative elite. Now that Hitler had entered national politics, could he be controlled? Could a man so consumed by vision and grievance be guided, moderated, or tamed once in power? It was a question that would haunt the winter of 1931. And for one man in particular, the focus of our next chapter, it was a question that demanded an answer. Baron von Oldenburg, the skeptical ally. The frost had turned the windows white by the time Baron Eberhard von Oldenburg reached the Riceland Hotel in Kassel. It was the morning of November 3rd, 1931, and the hallways smelled faintly of coal dust and the damp wool coats of arriving dignitaries. Oldenburg had been summoned, not commanded, but the distinction felt thin to attend a private meeting with representatives of the National Socialist Party. The Baron was 50, too broad-shouldered despite age, a veteran of the Kaiser's cavalry, and a man shaped by a life of order, hierarchy, and conservative stability. He distrusted movements that thrived on emotion. And above all, he distrusted Adolf Hitler. Yet he was here. Entering the conference room, Oldenburg found a cluster of men already gathered. Franz Selt, leader of the Stahlhelm paramilitary, Alfred Hugenberg, media magnate and head of the German National People's Party, and two senior SS officers dressed with immaculate rigidity. At the far end of the long oak table stood Hitler himself, hands clasped behind his back, silent, watching. Oldenburg offered a curt nod, which Hitler returned without warmth. The Baron had spent months studying this man's rise. He had read reports on the Nazi rallies, examined the growing SA formations, and listened to industrialists who spoke of Hitler as a useful counterweight to communism. But to Oldenburg there was something troublingly unpredictable behind Hitler's measured posture, a fire that burned far hotter than the political right was willing to admit. The meeting began with formalities. Hugenberg outlined the present crisis. Germany's government was paralyzed. Unemployment was climbing. Chancellor Brüning's policies had failed to restore stability. The conservative bloc, Hugenberg said, must join with the National Socialists in a united front to force new elections and reshape Germany's political order. Hitler stood motionless until Hugenberg finished. He then stepped forward, his voice low and even. "I have no desire to destroy the foundations of Germany," he said. "I seek only to remove the decay that has settled upon them." Oldenburg watched the faces around him soften. Hitler's delivery was flawless, controlled, almost subdued. Not the raging agitator from Munich beer halls, but a man projecting discipline and calculation. It was the mask Oldenburg had expected. Yet there was a moment, brief but unmistakable, when Hitler's eyes flashed with something harder, something like hunger. He spoke of a new national renewal, of purging weakness, of mobilizing youth, of restoring discipline through unity. His tone was calm, but the message carried an undercurrent that made Oldenburg uneasy. During a pause in the discussion, Hitler approached him. "Baron von Oldenburg," he said quietly, "Germany needs men like you. Men of the old guard who understand authority." Oldenburg's response was careful. "Authority, yes. But authority must be bound by responsibility, Herr Hitler." Hitler's smile was thin. Responsibility to whom? Oldenburg paused, noting the subtle challenge in the question. He answered, "To Germany, and to the rule of law that protects her." Hitler inclined his head, but the moment lingered between them like the faint scent of smoke. Hours later, after the meeting concluded, Oldenburg stepped outside into the cold afternoon air. Snow had begun to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Across the street, dozens of SA men stood at attention beside their trucks, waiting for orders. Oldenburg lit a cigarette and watched them. Their discipline was impressive, their fervor unmistakable. Yet he wondered, was this the force that would stabilize Germany, or the storm that would tear it apart? He thought of Hindenburg's advisors, who increasingly argued that Hitler could be boxed in, controlled by conservatives once in power. It was a comforting theory, one Oldenburg wished to believe. But as he watched the SA men march off, boots striking in perfect rhythm, he could not silence the question rising quietly within him. Was this man, this movement, truly an ally? Or was Germany preparing to hand the reins of the nation to a force that would never relinquish them? The snow continued to fall, and in the growing winter of 1931, Baron von Oldenburg sensed that Germany was approaching a line that once crossed could never be redrawn. The Berlin winter and the Prussian gamble. By early December, Berlin lay under a thin shell of ice. Streetcar rails shone like dull metal scars. The wind scoured the River Spree and rattled loose shutters in working-class districts. Yet the city was restless, alive with movement, tension, and the metallic echo of marching boots. The political struggle of late 1931 reached its climax around the Prussian Landtag, Germany's largest state government. The Prussian authorities, anchored by moderate social democrats, held significant power, control over the police, key administrative positions, and the ability to influence federal stability. For Hitler, dismantling Prussia's authority was not just strategic, it was essential. If Prussia fell, the Weimar Republic's final bulwark would crack. On December 6th, a referendum was held, urged on by both the Nazis and the Communist Party. It was a strange, uneasy alliance, two enemies marching parallel paths for the momentary purpose of undermining the same government. SA men handed out flyers at street corners. Communist agitators shouted slogans at tram stops. Police patrols increased threefold to prevent street clashes, though several still erupted. Oldenburg watched from a distance, sitting in the cold gallery of the Prussian Parliament building. The air inside was thick with pipe smoke. Deputies argued, gestured sharply, and pounded on desks. The debate had grown more symbolic than political. Everyone knew the stakes. If the referendum succeeded, an election would follow, and the Nazis believed they could seize Prussia itself. Hitler did not attend the proceedings. Instead, he worked behind the scenes, giving speeches across Berlin in rapid succession. In Schönberg, he addressed a hall so overcrowded that men stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath forming a low fog. In wedding, his voice boomed against the vaulted ceiling of the Sportpalast. He invoked images of national humiliation, of government incompetence, of a Germany betrayed not by foreign nations but by its own leaders. The winter air outside these halls was silent, but inside the crowd's reaction came like rolling thunder. On the night of the referendum, Count Hitler stayed at the Kaiserhof Hotel reading the tallied votes as they arrived by telegram. The atmosphere in his suite was tense. SA commanders whispered among themselves. Goebbels paced. Himmler stood near the window watching snowdrift over the Wilhelmstrabe. Shortly after midnight, the result became clear. The referendum had failed. It reached only 37% participation, far short of the 50% required. A heavy quiet fell over the room. Goebbels slammed a fist onto the table. Several SA officers muttered curses. Hitler simply closed the final telegram and folded his hands. "This changes nothing," he said softly. "The people have shown they are ready. Not enough yet, but ready. We continue." There was no rage, no outburst, just a steady simmering focus. Later that night, as Berlin slept under its thin veil of frost, Baron von Oldenburg walked alone across the Königsplatz. The referendum had failed, but the Nazi movement was clearly undeterred. Their discipline, their rhetoric, their growing influence, all of it, convinced Oldenburg that Germany was drifting into deeper waters. He remembered Hitler's question, responsibility to whom? As the wind scraped across the empty square, Oldenburg found himself confronting the answer. Hitler felt responsible only to his vision, and visions did not share power. The winter of 1931 had revealed something vital. Hitler could not be tamed because he had no intention of being tamed. The struggle ahead would not be a negotiation of political differences. It would be a contest for Germany's soul. The winter that changed everything. By the end of December 1931, Germany settled uneasily into the final days of the year. Christmas markets flickered with lantern light, but the festive songs felt thin, drowned out by the rumble of political marches and the unsettled murmurs in cafes and beer halls. The nation had not broken, but it had bent visibly and dangerously. Hitler's reputation had grown, not diminished, despite the failed referendum. His rallies in the last week before Christmas drew record crowds. Trains from Munich arrived packed with supporters carrying banners rolled tightly under their coats. Newspapers, many under Hugenberg's influence, published flattering editorials praising Hitler's discipline and youthful energy. Even foreign observers took note. The British envoy wrote privately that Hitler had become the most significant man in Germany not presently in government. The conservatives continued to debate, could Hitler be guided? Could his ambitions be curbed once he was brought into government under strict conditions? Many still believed so. Men like Papen, Schleicher, and Hugenberg were confident in their experience. They saw Hitler as a powerful engine they could steer. Baron von Oldenburg had attended several dinners that December where these views were eagerly voiced. The rooms were warm, the food rich, the conversation optimistic. Yet Oldenburg felt increasingly like an outsider. He saw something the others refused to acknowledge. One evening, after leaving a meeting near the Brandenburg Gate, he paused on the steps and watched a column of SA men march down Unter den Linden. Their boots struck the icy pavement in unison, echoing off the buildings. Their torches cast wavering flames against the winter air, and as they passed, not a single man looked left or right. They looked forward, eyes fixed ahead, as though following an invisible line stretching into the future. No party of this scale, Oldenburg realized, marched to serve as someone else's tool. Meanwhile, Hitler spent the final days of December in Munich dictating notes to his secretary for future speeches. He reflected on the year's failures, but more importantly on its successes. 1931 had given him a platform, Allies publicity, and a surge in national relevance. The Habsburg Front had legitimized him. The referendum had revealed the public's appetite for change. The widening fractures in the government showed that patience, not compromise, would bring him power. The snow outside the Burgerbrockler fell steadily on the empty streets. Inside, Hitler spoke quietly to his inner circle. Our time approaches. Germany moves toward us, not away. As midnight struck and 1931 came to an end, most Germans slept unaware of how close they stood to a turning point. The political tensions that winter had not exploded, but they had taken shape, lines drawn, alliances tested, ambitions revealed. And in the silent hours of the new year, the most dangerous illusion still held sway, that Adolf Hitler could be controlled. The winter of 1931 would be remembered not for its battles, but for its choices made in conference rooms, hotel suites, torchlit rallies, and quiet conversations behind closed doors. It was the season when Germany's leaders looked into the storm and convinced themselves they could ride its wind. History would prove them wrong, for by the end of the next year the question that haunted December 1931, "Can Hitler be tamed?" would have its grim answer, not through theory or political calculation, but through the irreversible reality of power. And from that point forward, Germany's fate, and the fate of millions, would be carried toward a darkness no one would be able to stop.